So right now it is Senator Josh Harkins. He chairs the Senate Finance Committee. We wanted to have him come in and break down the latest proposal from the Senate with respect to reforming taxes in Mississippi. What about it there, Senator?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So you had a little floor action this morning, but it didn't last long, huh?
No, we're going back in at 1:30.
But we're getting down to the old final days, aren't we?
We're getting close.
So we
closer than we've ever been.
All right, so that's right. We got new, I guess, updated legislation from the Senate concerning proposals to reform taxes in the state of Mississippi. Numerous features in that. I went through a breakdown earlier on the program, and I know it can get a little confusing when you start talking about the so-called triggers and the out years to continue to whittle away at the income tax. But perhaps talk more just generally about why the necessity for triggers to continue to cut the rate.
Well, this is to protect yourself, or in this case, the state from ending up like Kansas or somebody else, where they didn't have any triggers or guardrails. They went too far, too fast, and it caused problems. And they had to go back and raise taxes and do things. And so, what we want to do is, and what this bill essentially does, is it lets the economy dictate and warrant the necessity to cut taxes. We're saying if the economy is performing, we will in later years go through and these triggers will kind of guide us. But if the economy is performing, we will cut taxes further and continue to do so until it's eliminated. If the economy is performing, and that should be the ultimate judge of whether or not it's a cut is warranted. Is if the economy is progressing and activity is out there, and then people's jobs are out there abundant, the wages are going up, all the things you would associate with economic prosperity and growth. Well, that's going to be evidenced by the revenues that are coming in to the state through economic activity. And so what we're saying is, all right, let's let that be our guiding light. Let that be the North Star. If our economy is doing good, we're bringing in revenues, and we keep spending in check. Part of this also has a spending component. You have to watch spending. And so in both sides, we come in every year and vote on budgets. And so we'll know, based on the trigger language, we'll know what the revenue was from the prior year. And if our spending is in check and it creates a difference that meets the trigger language, we'll cut either 20 basis points, meaning 2.20 or 0.25 or 0.30. Depends on how the economy's going. If it's roaring, then we'll be making big cuts, and if it's not going as fast as some would expect or like, then there may be smaller cuts, but there'll be cuts nonetheless.
Starts with the need to have a projected surplus in the coming fiscal year.
Correct.
When you're deliberating the possibility of this trigger going into effect, which you don't have to if this were to become law, it would happen automatically. But when you're looking at the numbers to see if it would apply, you're comparing forecasted expenses with what which is current year revenues, and if that produces a surplus, it's got to start with a surplus. But it's got to at least be equal to 85% of what cutting the income tax rate by 1%. would be.
Yes.
Right?
So let's put that in numbers. Right now, the cost to cut 1% off our rate. So if we, at the end of next year, we'll have a 4% flat tax rate. And based on the last full year, calendar year taxes we had, it would cost about $400 million, a little over $400 million, 407, but we'll just say $400 million for round numbers' sake. That's the cost to cut 1 full point off the income tax rate. We're saying if that surplus from your prior year revenue collections and your current year spend, that surplus is 85% of that $400 million number, we'll cut 20 basis points. We'll cut 2.20 off the income tax rate. If it's 100% of that number, 400 million or more, we'll cut 25 basis points. And if the economy is really doing well and there's a lot of money that's come in to the state that year and we have 115% of that number, we'll cut 30 basis points. But the strength of our economy is going to determine the necessity or the warrant a cut in the income tax rate.
So just to complete the math there, $340 million, if at least the calculation of revenue versus expenses yields $340 million, 85%. of the 1%, which is, you said, $400 million roughly. If it comes out to be at least $340 million, then we will cut income taxes by effectively $85-90 million, something like that.
About that much.
Yeah,
that's the
which
effective
is 0.2.
0.2.
Yeah. So we go from 3 in that case. Let's say it's 2031 to 2.8.
2.8.
And we just continue that exercise.
If there's $400 million of surplus, we'll cut it to 2.75, and if there's over $460 million, we cut it to 2.7.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. 20, 25, 30.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. So in a year where we didn't achieve that requirement, no change to the income tax.
But if you had a $200 million surplus, you would have a $200 million jump on the following year. And if you had another, $250 million in excess revenue, that puts you over a 0.3 reduction. So it also makes us keep the spending in check. That's on the backside of this. It's based on revenue, but there's a spending component. If you keep your spending in line and don't go crazy spending, then you'll have that surplus there in order to cut taxes.
Okay.
What I think the important part that we wanted, there are two things that the Senate position kind of took into consideration is we didn't want to sit here and squeeze everything out of it and borrow money, go back into borrowing a lot of money to fund the things that are recurring in government spending. We have a lot of buildings across the state through our community colleges, our IHL, our state-owned buildings. There's a lot of property that requires maintenance. There's a good bit of recurring expenditures that are there year in, year out that are not necessarily budgeted in the sense like general fund appropriations, but they are problems that we have to address year in, year out. And so I think that was the thing that we wanted to make sure that we wouldn't sit here and say, okay, we're going to finance an income tax elimination by going out and borrowing a bunch of money in order to make all these payments on these other requirements that are out there for the state. So we're saying, look, we got the money to invest in that, to continue to reduce our debt and bring down the debt, which is going to free up recurring money through debt service elimination. I think in a couple of years, our debt service will drop about 60 to 80, maybe $100 million. So we're looking at freed up money that can be used for things that we need to do, additional investments in education, community colleges, IHL, child protective services, any of those things that requiring what you're seeing a lot of spending on in the last 3, 4, 5 years. It's been in corrections and some of these other things that there are some lawsuits out there. So we wanted to make sure that we were not going to run up a credit card bill in order to do something when we didn't have the money to do it.
So that's a good synopsis of the income tax aspect of it. Then we've got the general sales tax, no change in the Senate bill, right?
No change in general sales tax. We don't raise anybody's sales tax in any area, use tax or sales tax on anything to do this. We're going to let economic growth be the driver.
Groceries, sales tax on groceries, you're dropping that from 7 to 5. And would that go into effect
That
this
would go
July?
into effect immediately, yes, July 1.
New fiscal year. And then the tax on fuel.
Tax on fuel, 3 cents a year for 3 years, and then it's indexed.
Starting when?
They would be after the final implementation of the last year of the 3-year implementation of 3 cents. So in 3 years, it would after that year, it would be every other year. It would be indexed according to the National Highway Construction Cost Index.
Okay.
So the cost of construction is what's going to index the gas tax. As it goes up, it'll go up a little bit. It can only go up a penny.
But the 3 cents per year, when does that begin? When does that
commence? It begins this July.
Okay, this that's what I thought. That's consistent with the original bill, right?
This version is the Senate plan with a trigger at the end of it.
Okay.
We didn't change up anything in our bill.
Except you included PERS.
Well, PERS, yeah, but I'm talking about as far as the taxes component of it. It didn't do anything. But PERS, that's an issue that we've got to address as part of this. You can't, we've talked about the unfunded liability, and we can't continue to kick that can down the road any longer.
Gotcha.
So that's part of it.
Gotcha. All right, we got a break right here. Senator Josh Harkins is our guest in the Element Wealth studio. Coming right back. Senator Josh Harkins chairs the Senate Finance Committee. That's a little tequila there.
Very apropos.
Right. Of course, we had Tax Man bumping us out. You got some positive feedback on that one, by the way, Rhino, including from my good friend, Representative Fred Shanks in Rankin County. He says, good song choice. Appreciate that. So let's continue the discussion. Just contrast Senate bill, House bill. I'll take a whack at it, then I'll shut up and let you talk. First thing is, the Senate bill does not increase the general sales tax. The House bill increases it from 7 to 8 over a 2-year period. Mm-hmm. The Senate bill does phase out the income tax based on achievement of certain financial metrics, so-called triggers. Does that incrementally based on economic growth, as you point out. The House bill doesn't have such a requirement. It just phases it out over a 10-year period in equal increments of 0.35 based now because they go from 4 to 3.5 instead of 4 to 3. Mm-hmm. So it's 0.35 increments over 10 years instead of 0.3. And then I think you guys are now aligned with respect to grocery sales taxes. Mm-hmm. 7 to 5. The diversion program that got kicked out of this, that got removed from the current version of the House bill. The diversion program that's in place today, policy, stays in place under the House bill. No change there. And then the gas tax.
Gas tax.
They're 5 cents. Their new draft, 5 cents per year over 3 years for a total of an increase of 15 cents per gallon.
Yeah.
And you guys are 3 cents for a total increase of 9.
That's indexed.
Okay.
I think theirs may have an index. I haven't seen the complete package of what they passed yesterday. It is different than the version they first sent out, so you'd have to go back and look at see what the diversions are, see if there's any, the grocery tax, all those things. I mean, we essentially passed our bill as it was, but added a trigger to it. And,
okay.
And, we keep the cities whole. We keep all the other education enhancement fund budget whole. We keep the ad valorem tax reduction whole. So all those diversions that are in there are going to remain whole as it relates to the grocery tax reduction. But, in this conversation, Gerard, I think that one of the things that we talked about but we hadn't really focused on a whole lot is spending. I don't know. I'm not aware of very many proposals that cut really any spending in government.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen anything to that either.
Now,
to that effect.
I think you're going to see, more of an effort. I think to look at and try to find ways to make it more efficient. We always do that. We should try to do that. We should strive to do that all the time to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse that's in government. But nobody's proposed any major cuts to anything to help fund tax cuts. So, at some point, you're going to have to sit there and decide whether or not, cutting taxes is one that you're willing to cut some budgets and get rid of some things, or where are you going to look for the dollars? So, spending, tax credits, all these things are, appropriations. It's spending at the end of the day, whether you call it a tax credit or you call it an appropriation. But we're trying to do things that are going to put Mississippi in a position to be prosperous and going forward. And I'm all about doing this, but I think it's responsible. Fiscal responsibility is a part of conservatism. I think it's getting lost in the discussion sometimes. This plan takes into consideration our spending. It takes into consideration our revenues. And if there is an excess of revenue, that is what is going to warrant a cut in the income tax and benefit the working folks of Mississippi. That's what we want to do. We don't want to raise anybody's taxes to do it.
Are you concerned that the House's plan that doesn't require any sort of financial triggers, doesn't require requirements there, that might cause a problem? I mean, that's essentially what you're saying.
That's our concern. That's why we put triggers in it. I mean, if you try to run this out in a pro forma, I know pro formas are only worth the paper they're written on, but it's a good indication of where you may stand if history is an indicator of where you're going. I think it's what concerns us that we should do that. We should put triggers in if you're going to take this step of just continuously going out and trying to eliminate it.
Yeah. The House, though, doesn't seem to be in support of such a plan, best I can tell, Senator, that they would not support any plan that would require that the state pass through certain financial gates in order to continue to reduce the income tax. They just want to set that in motion and just have that be completely eliminated over a 10-year period.
Well, I believe that's a stark difference in the two sides and where we stand on the issue of how you eliminate taxes. I think that's absolutely the most important part of income tax cuts is how you cut. If you're going to cut a certain amount, do you front load it? Do you space it out? Do you try to absorb it naturally without having to raise sales taxes to do it? I mean, that's the discussion that we're having right now, and that's the thing that's proposed from both chambers is, and it's like I said on your show at the beginning of the session. We can have the same goal in mind. We just have two different paths to get there, and which one do we feel like is a prudent, responsible way to get there? And I believe we put forward that plan. The Senate has diligently looked at and evaluated and run pro formas. We've had just constant discussions with Legislative Budget Office, Department of Revenue, state economist. I mean, we've taken every available resource and asset at the disposal of the legislature and the Senate to come up with a plan that is responsible. And I think this is what you have in front of you today is a responsible plan that does, quote unquote, put a plan in place to eliminate the income tax if our economy is performing. And I think that's, any rational, reasonable person, I think, would also say that's a pretty good way to do it.
Talk about the proposed changes from your side to the rainy day fund.
Well, that's a good point. Right now our rainy day fund, our working cash stabilization fund, is done by a 10% of appropriations number. That's the maximum amount you can have in it is 10% of appropriation. And at the end of the year, any excess revenue goes through a split. 50% of it goes to working cash stabilization until that fund is full, and the rest goes to CapEx. Well, we've been pretty much close to being full the last several years. That's why you're seeing so much more money going into CapEx and available for CapEx projects at the end of the year. The Senate position is to change that to a percentage of revenue. 12% of revenue is essentially almost like going at a 14% of appropriation right now. So we're saying we're going to tie it to revenue and go to 12% right now and put money in through the CapEx fund to build it up. And then by 2030, when the triggers start to work, we would be at 13%.
Gotcha.
And that creates a healthy rainy day fund. We're probably one of the lowest in the country with the percentage of rainy day fund compared to our budget in the country. And I think you see a lot of states that are really building up their rainy day fund. And you don't want to take too much money out of the market, but you want to be in a position where you can weather a storm. And if you're going to eliminate one of your main sources of revenue, you better have a stable rainy day fund to weather any hurricanes or disasters or whatever may come up.
What's next?
We'll take the bill up on the floor here after lunch and proceed on.
And is the House, they're taking theirs up today too, are they not?
I think they were taking it up this morning.
Okay. So likely we're going to go to conference on this? Is that what you see?
I don't know. We'll see.
Okay. Not sure what that means, but
I think that we've gotten to the point where we've got a plan in place that eliminates the income tax. It's done responsibly. It's got triggers that would necessitate a reason to cut because you have excess revenue, and then putting that back into the economy and giving a break to the working folks of the state is what we want to do, and we feel like we've got a good plan. Okay.
Well, the House does too. Seems like both sides are kind of dug in here.
Yeah. But we'll see. I mean, look, that's why we sit here and we've talked all session. And Chairman Lamar and I have worked a lot of hours. I know he's done a lot of work on it, and he's passionate about it. We're passionate about it, but we're also passionate about being right and trying not to cause any problems.
Yeah. Another difference that we can just chat about quickly is the PERS program.
Yeah.
Senator Sparks worked a lot, I know, on 2 or 3 measures that would contribute to stabilizing PERS, and it looks like the Tier 5 is probably the main one. That's been pulled forward, right?
Correct.
Into this legislation?
Into this legislation. And as the Tier 5, if Tier 5 is adopted, the new employees that go in there, the excess from their contribution would go to the unfunded liability. So
the employer contribution.
Yeah, the employer contribution. You're immediately putting extra money into unfunded liability Just through the fifth tier.
The House, on the other hand, just dedicates the first $100 million of lottery proceeds to the PERS fund, just essentially transfers
I think the
money.
Senate position is that the tiers we have right now are not sustainable, so there's fundamental reform needed in the tiers and moving forward, so it will be a sustainable program into the future for our employees and retirees.
Senator Josh Harkins chairs the Senate Finance Committee. He's been our guest. Always good to see you, Senator.
Thank you, Gerard.
Thanks, man. Coming right back in the Element Wealth.